I worked as a backcountry ranger in the Adirondacks for 5 seasons before I transferred to a desk job. The position was everything I thought I wanted. I'd grown up hiking and camping with my dad, and getting paid to patrol wilderness areas seemed like a dream. Most of my time was spent maintaining trails, checking permits, and helping lost hikers find their way back. The Adirondack Park is massive, 6 million acres of mountains, forests, and lakes. My assigned territory covered about 200 square miles in the northern section. During peak season, I'd see maybe a dozen people a day on the popular trails. In the off-season, I could go weeks without encountering another soul. It was late September when I met the Sullivan family. They'd reserved a backcountry campsite for 3 nights, 2 parents and their teenage daughter. I checked their permit at the trailhead and gave them the usual safety briefing: bear protocols, water treatment, leave no trace principles. The father, Tom, seemed experienced. He had good gear and asked intelligent questions about the route. The mother, Linda, was quieter but seemed prepared. Their daughter, Sarah, was maybe 15, earbuds in, clearly not thrilled about the trip. I told them I'd be patrolling the area and might swing by their campsite to check in. Tom said that would be fine. 2 days later, I was doing my rounds when I came across their site. It was around 3 p.m., still plenty of daylight left. The campsite was a mess. Their tent was collapsed on one side, gear was scattered everywhere: sleeping bags, cooking equipment, clothes. A backpack hung from a tree branch, which was correct bear protocol, but everything else looked wrong. I called out. No response. I walked into the site slowly, looking for signs of what happened. No blood, no obvious damage to the tent, but the chaos suggested they'd left in a hurry. Then I saw the note. It was pinned to a tree with a tent stake, written in shaky handwriting on a torn piece of paper. Took the eastern trail, Sarah missing, going to look. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my radio and called it in. Dispatch said they'd send additional rangers and coordinate with search and rescue. They told me to stay at the campsite and wait. I stayed, but I also started looking around the perimeter. About 50 yards from the camp, I found Sarah's phone. It was face down in the dirt, screen cracked. When I picked it up, it was still on. The battery was at 4%. The last thing on the screen was a text message, unsent, in the draft box. Someone watching me. I brought the phone back to camp and waited. 2 other rangers arrived within the hour. We split up and started searching the area, calling Sarah's name. Around 7 p.m., we found Tom and Linda. They were sitting on a log about a mile east of their campsite, completely silent. When we approached, Linda was crying. Tom just stared at the ground. "We can't find her," he said. "We looked everywhere." I asked what happened. Tom said Sarah had gone to get water from the creek around noon. When she didn't come back after 20 minutes, they went looking. Found her water bottle by the creek, but no Sarah. They'd been searching for 3 hours before leaving the note and continuing east, thinking she might have gotten disoriented and walked the wrong direction. We organized a full search, brought in dogs, volunteers, helicopters. For 3 days, we combed every inch of that area. We found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no evidence she'd been attacked by an animal. It was like she'd vanished. On the 4th day, I was searching alone near a ravine about 2 miles from the original campsite. The terrain was rough, steep slopes, dense undergrowth, the kind of place you wouldn't go unless you were lost or running. I heard something, a voice, faint, calling for help. I scrambled down the slope, nearly twisting my ankle on the loose rocks. The voice got louder. "Help! Please! I'm here!" I pushed through the brush and found her. Sarah was sitting against a tree, her clothes torn and dirty. She looked exhausted, but unharmed. I called it in immediately and knelt down next to her. "Sarah, are you okay? Where have you been?" She looked at me with wide eyes. "I got lost. I've been trying to find my way back." "For 4 days?" She nodded. "Something felt wrong." She'd been missing for 4 days in rough terrain, but she had no major injuries. No dehydration signs, no exposure symptoms. She should have been in much worse condition. I radioed her location and waited with her until the rescue team arrived. Her parents were brought to the site, and there was crying and hugging and relief. But Sarah wouldn't look at me. Every time I tried to meet her eyes, she'd look away. The family was taken to the hospital for evaluation. Sarah was released the next day with a clean bill of health. The official report said she'd gotten disoriented and survived by drinking creek water and staying put. Case closed. But 3 weeks later, I got a call from Linda. She said Sarah had been acting strange since they got home, withdrawn, not sleeping, refusing to talk about what happened. Then one night, Sarah woke up screaming. When Linda ran into her room, Sarah was standing at the window, staring out at their backyard. "He's out there," Sarah said. "He's waiting for me to come back." Linda asked who. Sarah wouldn't say. Linda asked me if I'd seen anything unusual during the search. I said no, which was true, but I didn't tell her about something I found the day after Sarah was rescued. I went back to the ravine alone, retracing my steps. I wanted to understand how Sarah had survived 4 days in that terrain. Near where I'd found her, I discovered a small cave opening hidden behind thick vegetation. Inside was a makeshift camp. Sleeping bag, camping stove, stack of canned food, water bottles, and photographs. Dozens of them tacked to the cave walls. All of Sarah. Taken from a distance through trees, at the campsite, by the creek, in the ravine. I reported it immediately. Police investigated, collected evidence, tried to match fingerprints. They never found who'd been living in that cave, and Sarah never told anyone what really happened during those 4 days. I transferred to a desk job 6 months later. I told people it was for better hours, but really, I just couldn't go back into those woods. Because sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I think about those photographs. And I wonder if whoever took them is still out there, watching the trails, waiting for someone else to get lost. I spent 2 summers working as a fishing guide in northern Canada. The lodge where I worked was remote, fly-in only, about 300 miles from the nearest town. We'd take guests out on the lake in small boats, help them catch pike and walleye, teach them the techniques. Most of the guests were older men from the States, executives looking to unplug for a week. The lodge could accommodate maybe 20 people at a time, and we had 4 guides on staff. During my second summer, we had a group of 3 men book a week-long trip. Brothers, Mark, James, and David, all in their 40s, from somewhere in Minnesota. They seemed normal at first, friendly, experienced anglers, knew their equipment. Mark was the oldest and clearly in charge. James was quiet, kept to himself. David was the youngest and the most talkative. I was assigned to guide them for the week. The first 2 days went fine. We caught fish, told stories, enjoyed the scenery. They got along well, lots of joking and ribbing each other the way brothers do. On the 3rd day, things started to feel off. We were out on the lake, anchored in a spot that usually produced good fishing. It was mid-afternoon, hot and still. The kind of day where the fish go deep and the fishing slows down. David was in the front of the boat, James in the middle, Mark in the back next to me. We'd been sitting in silence for maybe 20 minutes when Mark said something that made me uncomfortable. "You ever think about just disappearing out here?" I thought he was joking. "What do you mean?" "Like, just not going back, staying out here." I laughed. "It's beautiful, but I don't know about staying forever." Mark didn't laugh. He just kept staring at the water. James spoke up from the middle seat. "Mark, don't start." "What start?" Mark said. "I'm just talking." "You're making it weird," David added. Mark went quiet after that, but the mood had shifted. The rest of the day was tense. That night at dinner, I mentioned the conversation to another guide. He said Mark had asked him something similar the day before, about what would happen if someone just didn't show up for the flight out. We agreed it was odd, but didn't think much of it beyond that. The next morning, James didn't come to breakfast. I was waiting at the dock with the boat when Mark and David showed up without him. "Where's James?" I asked. "Still sleeping," Mark said. "He had a rough night. We'll let him rest." "You sure? We could wait." "Nah, he'll be fine. Let's go." So we went, just the three of us. The fishing was good that day. We caught several nice pike and the conversation stayed light, but I kept noticing Mark and David exchanging looks, quick glances. Nothing I could point to specifically, but it felt like they were communicating without words. When we got back around 5 p.m., James still wasn't up. I followed Mark and David back to their cabin. Mark knocked on the door. No answer. He opened it. The cabin was empty. James's bed was made, his gear was gone, his fishing rod, his tackle box, everything. Mark turned to me. He must have gone out on his own. I felt my chest tighten. Guests aren't allowed to take boats without a guide. Maybe he went hiking, David suggested. I radioed the lodge manager. We organized a search, checked all the boats, none were missing, checked the trails around the lodge. No sign of James. By dark, we'd found nothing. The manager called the authorities. Because of our location, it would take at least a day for anyone to fly in and help search. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about Mark and David's reactions didn't sit right. They seemed concerned, but not panicked. Not the way you'd expect if your brother was missing in the wilderness. The next morning, I volunteered to search the far side of the lake, where we'd fished the day before. I took one of the boats out alone and motored to the spot where we'd anchored. I cut the engine and drifted, looking at the shoreline. That's when I saw it. A bright orange life jacket floating in the weeds near the bank. I pulled the boat over and grabbed it. It was one of ours, from the lodge. No blood, no tears, but definitely one of our jackets. I searched the area around it, found nothing else. When I got back to the lodge, I reported what I'd found. The manager called it in. Authorities said they'd send a dive team. Mark and David were standing on the dock when I pulled in. I showed them the life jacket. "Is this James's?" I asked. Mark took it, turned it over in his hands. "Could be. They all look the same." I stared at him. "Your brother is missing, and this was floating where we fished yesterday. You don't think that's significant?" David put a hand on Mark's shoulder. "We should tell him." Mark shot him a look. "Tell him what?" "About James." I waited. David took a breath. "James has been having problems. Mental health stuff. The trip was supposed to help, but he's been getting worse. Talking about not wanting to go back home, saying he wanted to start over." Mark cut in. "We thought getting him out here would help clear his head. We didn't think he'd actually do something." "Do what?" I asked. Neither of them answered. The dive team arrived 2 days later. They searched for 3 days and found nothing. No body, no evidence, just that life jacket. James was declared missing, presumed drowned. The case stayed open but eventually went cold. Mark and David flew out on the scheduled day. Before they left, Mark pulled me aside. "Thank you for everything you did," he said. "James would have appreciated it." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. As they walked to the float plane, I saw them both look back at the lake one last time. They weren't crying, they weren't sad. They looked relieved. I quit at the end of that summer, told the lodge I was going back to school. But really, I just couldn't shake the feeling that I'd helped cover up something. That Mark and David knew exactly what happened to James, and that the lake knew too. I worked as a canoe trip leader for a youth camp in Maine for 3 summers. The camp ran week-long wilderness trips for teenagers, canoeing, camping, teaching outdoor skills. My job was to lead groups of 6 to 8 kids along designated river routes, making sure everyone stayed safe and had a good time. Most trips went smoothly. Some kids complained about mosquitoes or sleeping on the ground, but generally it was a positive experience. During my 3rd summer, I led a trip that I still have nightmares about. The group was 8 kids, ages 14 to 16, mix of boys and girls, mostly from suburban areas on the East Coast. They'd all completed the camp's basic skills training, so they knew how to paddle and set up camp. We launched on a Monday morning. The route was one I'd done dozens of times, 40 miles over 5 days, following a river through mostly uninhabited forest. The first 2 days were great. Good weather, strong paddlers, everyone getting along. We made good time and camped at designated sites along the route. On the third night, we set up camp on a small island in the middle of the river. The island was maybe an acre, mostly flat with a rocky beach on one side and dense trees on the other. It was a popular camping spot, and I'd stayed there multiple times before. We made dinner, had a campfire, told stories. Around 9:30 p.m., everyone went to their tents. I stayed up a bit longer to make sure the fire was properly extinguished. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint, coming from somewhere in the trees. A woman's voice, singing something I didn't recognize. The melody was strange, not quite right, like notes that didn't belong together. I stood up and walked toward the sound. Hello? The singing stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing. I called out again. Is someone there? We're camped here for the night. Silence. I went back to the fire and kicked dirt over the last embers. Told myself it was probably campers on the mainland playing music. But we were in the middle of nowhere. The nearest road was 15 miles away. I went to my tent and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to screaming. I bolted out of my tent. One of the girls, Emma, was standing by the fire pit crying. What happened? I ran over to her. Someone was in my tent, she sobbed. Someone touched my face. I checked her tent. Empty. Her tent mate, another girl named Olivia, was awake now too, looking terrified. Did you see anyone? I asked Olivia. She shook her head. I was asleep. Emma started screaming and I woke up. I gathered all the kids outside their tents and did a head count. Everyone was accounted for. I searched the island with my flashlight. Found nothing. Emma insisted someone had touched her face, had run their fingers across her forehead while she slept. When she woke up and saw a figure crouched in the tent, she screamed and it ran out. I didn't know what to believe. It could have been a dream, but Emma was genuinely terrified. I made the decision to stay up the rest of the night, keeping watch while the kids tried to sleep. Around 4 a.m., I heard the singing again. This time it was closer, coming from the tree line at the edge of camp. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. In the beam, I saw movement, a figure stepping behind a tree. "Hey!" I shouted. "Who's there?" The singing stopped. I walked toward the tree line slowly. "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave. You're scaring the kids." I heard footsteps running away through the trees, fast, crashing through brush. I didn't follow. I went back to the fire pit and sat there until sunrise. When the kids woke up, I told them we were breaking camp early and moving to the next site. I didn't explain why. We packed up quickly and got back on the river by 7 a.m. That should have been the end of it. But that night at our new campsite, it happened again. This time it was one of the boys, Tyler, who woke up screaming. Same thing, someone touched his face while he slept. I searched the area, found nothing. The kids were terrified now. They wanted to go home. I radioed the camp director and explained the situation. He said he'd send a motorboat to pick us up the next morning from a rendezvous point downstream. We paddled through the night, taking turns sleeping in the canoes while others kept watch. Around midnight, we heard the singing again. It was following us along the shore. Every time we'd pass a certain point, the singing would stop and then start up again further ahead, like whoever it was knew our route and was waiting. By dawn, we reached the pickup point. The motorboat arrived an hour later and took us back to camp. The kids were traumatized. Parents were called. The camp director filed a police report. Rangers searched the area but found no evidence of anyone camping or living in the woods along that river. The camp stopped running trips on that route for the rest of the summer. I finished out the season, but didn't come back the following year. I still think about those nights, the singing, the figure in the tent, the feeling of being followed. Sometimes I wonder if it was a person at all, or something else that lives in those woods, drawn to the sound of sleeping children. I don't know which possibility scares me more.